I always thought betrayal would come with a warning sign. Missed calls, cold shoulders, something. But not with Daniel. My husband of 18 years kissed me goodnight like nothing was wrong, while secretly hiring a divorce attorney behind my back. The kicker? He thought I wouldn't notice until he'd already carved up my fortune. But I didn't become the woman behind a $700 million empire by being naive. So I played along until I moved every last cent, and what happened next was something even I didn't see coming. They say money can't buy happiness, but it can buy silence. And that's silence. That's exactly what made me suspicious. We'd just gotten back from St. Barth's. Daniel booked a private villa perched so high above the ocean I could see the curve of the horizon from bed. Picture-perfect sunsets, hand-fed strawberries, and a husband who suddenly couldn't stop complimenting me. "You're glowing," he'd whisper while refilling my wine. Like when we first met. I should have melted. I should have believed it. But instead, I smiled and filed the compliment under evidence. Something was off. He was too attentive, too available. Daniel wasn't the type to cancel golf with his partners just to watch Netflix with me on a Tuesday. We'd been married 18 years, long enough to know that when Daniel starts being romantic, he's either after something or covering something up. I remember the exact moment the feeling turned from suspicion to certainty. It was a Wednesday morning. He left early for the gym, and I stayed behind to review a foundation grant proposal in my study. I went to print it, and the printer started pulling a sheet that wasn't mine. A single page, face down. At first I didn't think twice, but when I turned it over, my stomach tightened. It was a billing statement from a boutique law firm in Manhattan. A name I didn't recognize until I read the subject line. Client, Daniel Hawthorne. Matter, marital dissolution strategy. That was the moment the silence broke. My hands were shaking. Not with heartbreak. No, that would come later. Right then, what I felt was something far colder. Humiliation. You don't spend nearly 2 decades building a life with someone, sharing beds, dreams, holiday traditions, and find out from your printer that they're planning to leave you. No conversation. No warning. Just strategy. Like I was a stock to divest from. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat down, crossed my legs, and stared at that paper like it was a chessboard. He was making the first move. Fine. But I'd already spent 18 years becoming someone he never fully saw. A woman who could outplan, outlast, and outplay him. Because while Daniel thought he married a philanthropist with a little family wealth, what he didn't know was that I'd spent the last decade growing that inheritance into a $700 million fortress. And the keys? He never had them. Not really. So I took a deep breath, slid the page into a drawer, and smiled to myself. If Daniel wanted a strategy, I'd give him a war. The worst part wasn't the document. It was the days that followed. Once you realize your husband is planning to leave you like a thief in the night, every small interaction turns radioactive. The morning coffee he brought me in bed? I didn't drink it. I watched the steam curl up like smoke from a fire he thought I didn't see. The way he kissed my forehead before heading out for work meetings. I counted the seconds, 3. Always 3. Like he was timing it. Like he was performing. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I knew better than to tip my hand too soon. Instead, I started watching him with the same precision I'd once used to manage a 9-figure portfolio acquisition in Zurich. Every gesture, every glance, every half-truth suddenly had weight. I wasn't his wife anymore, I was his opponent, and he had no idea the game had already started. So I did what any underestimated woman does in a moment like this. I got help. Quietly, discreetly. I called Carla, my private wealth advisor. She'd been with me since my first hedge fund dividend check cleared, long before Daniel ever asked for my number at that gallery opening in Milan. I remember her tone, calm, professional, but just beneath it, ice. The kind of ice you want on your side in a storm. I take it this isn't about tax planning, she said. No, I replied. It's about asset protection. And speed. Within 24 hours, we had a strategy. Every liquid asset was routed through my trust in the Caymans, something Daniel had no access to, no knowledge of. The properties in my name were moved into limited liability holding companies. The joint accounts. I left them untouched for now. It was important that Daniel believed nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I reached out to my lawyer, Maureen Fields, She doesn't advertise, doesn't need to. Her specialty? High net worth divorce settlements with a body count. The moment I told her about the law firm Daniel had contacted, her voice dropped. You need to assume he's going after everything, she said, and that he's not working alone. That's when the real paranoia set in. Not just about Daniel, but about who he'd looped in. Had he already spoken to his sister, the one who never liked me? Was he using his company's compliance officers to dig into my businesses? Did he know about the off-market tech shares I just bought through a shell venture? I couldn't afford to slip, because the truth was, I had more to lose than he did. Daniel had status, but I had wealth, the kind of wealth that doesn't just fund lifestyles, it funds legacies. Private schools, endowments, biotech startups, political leverage. And the man who once held my hand at gala dinners now saw me as an obstacle between him and a golden parachute. But the fool forgot one thing. I built this life. Alone. Before him. Beyond him. And if he thought he could quietly erase me from the narrative he helped co-write, he was about to find out what silence really sounds like when it comes with subpoenas, asset locks, and financial no-fly zones. By the end of the week, I had eyes on his emails, access to his private calendar, and courtesy of a very friendly tech executive, metadata on his travel logs. The full picture was forming. And what I saw, he wasn't just planning to leave. He was planning to ambush me. So I did what any ambushed queen does. I sharpened my crown. You don't protect $700 million by accident. You do it by treating every handshake like a contract and every smile like a tell. And I had smiled at Daniel for 18 years, memorizing his every weakness, every blind spot, while he believed I was nothing more than the elegant wife beside him at the firm's holiday party. So the moment I realized he was planning a stealth attack, I didn't panic. I started building a fortress. Quietly. Efficiently. Like I'd done 100 times before, but this time, the target was my own husband. The first step was psychological. I needed him calm, complacent, so I became the version of myself he expected to see. Affectionate, pliable, distracted. I asked about his day, laughed at his dry jokes, even cooked his favorite risotto, despite the fact that every time I looked at him, I pictured the email header from his divorce lawyer. He thought I was in the dark. In reality, I was pulling the curtains closed on his entire plan. While Daniel slept next to me, snoring softly, mouth open, I lay awake, memorizing balance sheets, offshore trust structures, property deeds in Aspen and Bel Air. I'd spent the last decade turning my inheritance into a diversified empire of assets so tangled and legally sophisticated, even Forbes wouldn't have been able to trace it all. But now I needed to make sure he couldn't touch any of it. That meant accelerating timelines. I had originally planned to restructure my holdings at the end of the fiscal year. That plan moved up now. Carla and I worked late into the night to activate contingencies we had only joked about during risk planning sessions. The Cayman's Trust, codename Ariadne, was locked down, with distributions rerouted through an entity in Singapore. My two shell companies, used to quietly acquire high-yield IP patents, were merged into a foundation registered under a conservation nonprofit I chaired. If Daniel had tried to follow the money, he would have found nothing but a green initiative to save endangered bees. And even that was only half true. By the third day, my real estate holdings had been bundled into a multi-layered REIT structure, wrapped in an irrevocable trust that triggered under very specific conditions. Conditions which, thanks to Daniel's little plan, had now been met. But the most satisfying piece? The prenup. Daniel always thought it was symbolic. Back when we signed it, I wasn't yet managing my own wealth. My father had just passed, and most of my estate was still in probate. The document Daniel pushed was fairly standard, with one laughable clause, a sunset provision. After 15 years of marriage, the prenup expired. Just vanished, as if it had never existed. We were at year 18. It was a little detail Daniel had forgotten, or maybe never understood in the first place. But I hadn't forgotten. In fact, I kept the original notarized copy in a climate-controlled safe. And now, that little expired clause was my sword. The timing couldn't have been better. I had full control, no prenup, full asset mobility, and a husband so sure of himself he was already laying the groundwork for a mutual separation. I know this because, on day 5 of my quiet plan, I intercepted a text. It was to his sister. Don't worry. She won't see it coming. Her team's soft. She only started managing things herself recently. I'll be out and protected before she even knows it's serious. Soft. He called me soft. That night, I made a call to Maureen. I wanted airtight. I told her. Every cent. Every clause. I want to bleed him out legally without ever raising my voice. She chuckled. We'll do it without you even showing up in court. While Daniel was preparing to blindside me with legal filings, I was already 10 moves ahead. The moment his petition dropped, my response would land with the weight of a tank, asset shielding, discovery demands, and a full forensic audit of his company's private equity holdings, which, might I add, were already being looked into by the SEC for regulatory anomalies. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted clarity. I wanted Daniel to see, clearly, painfully, that the woman he underestimated was capable of dismantling him without ever raising her voice. That love, once betrayed, doesn't always become rage. Sometimes it becomes precision. So I waited. I went to Pilates. I smiled through brunches. I kissed him goodnight, and even feigned surprise when he said, I might be traveling next week for work. I told him to enjoy himself. I already knew he'd be staying at the Aman with his new little friend. She was 31, according to her LinkedIn, and currently exploring consulting opportunities. Cute. I also knew that when he landed back in New York, his world would be frozen. Legally, financially, socially, and by then, I wouldn't be Mrs. Hawthorne anymore. I'd be something else entirely, the CEO of my own survival. The hardest part about knowing a lie is pretending you still believe it. For 7 days, I lived in a performance so flawless it would have made a Broadway actress flinch. I wore silk to breakfast, laughed at Daniel's recycled jokes, poured his coffee exactly how he liked it, 2 sugars, splash of oat milk, stir counterclockwise. Every movement choreographed to perfection. He had no idea he was dancing through the final act of his own performance. But I'll admit, there were moments I wanted to break character. Like the night he came home late, claiming his board meeting ran long. He smelled like Hermes and guilt. I asked him if he wanted to join me for a nightcap on the terrace. He said he was exhausted and disappeared into the shower. I poured 2 glasses of scotch anyway, as usual. I watched the ice melt while he scrubbed someone else's perfume off his skin. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, it did, but because pain is power when you know how to wield it. And I had decided long ago I wouldn't waste a single tear on a man planning my erasure. The real turning point came on the 8th day, just before Daniel left for what he called a strategic off-site in the Hamptons. He packed light, linen shirts, cashmere sweaters, cologne that cost more than most people's rent. And he was humming. That was the detail that made me want to laugh. The sheer arrogance. He thought he'd won. Before he walked out the door, he leaned down and kissed my cheek like nothing in the world was wrong. Love you, he said. Casual as you please. Always, I replied. Always aware. Always 10 steps ahead. The moment the door clicked shut, I made my final moves. My attorney filed a notice of restricted access. Daniel's legal team would be served before he even finished his second cocktail. My estate administrator executed a full power transfer on our secondary property holdings. Everything he thought was joint was now legally encased in a structure he couldn't crack without a federal-level court order. And then came the chess piece I'd been saving for last, a sealed deposition I had prepared, notarized, and timed for release within 24 hours of Daniel's filing. It wasn't just about money. It was about pattern, a historical record of financial coercion, asset manipulation, and undisclosed side ventures. Things he'd sworn didn't exist. Things I had receipts for. Every secret he thought he'd hidden, I already had in labeled folders, each more damning than the last. That afternoon, I received the confirmation. Daniel had filed for divorce. Unilateral. Aggressive. His lawyers argued irreconcilable differences, but what they really meant was irreconcilable that she outgrew him. His legal team served the documents at our Manhattan address. I wasn't there. I was sitting at Carla's penthouse, barefoot, drinking espresso with oat milk. The irony wasn't lost on me as we watched the digital dominoes fall. Bank account freezes, corporate voting right revocations, trust restructuring acknowledgments, securities compliance notices, one after the other. By the time Daniel returned to the city, freshly tanned and full of expectation, he was walking into a legal meat grinder. I'll never forget the voicemail. "Sandra, I just got a notice from Carla's office. What the hell is going on? You need to call me. This isn't fair." Fair? What's fair about lying to someone for months while quietly plotting to take half their life's work? What's fair about watching someone's trust like it's a vault to crack open, then being shocked when the vault slams shut with you on the outside? I didn't call him back. Instead, I sent him one message. "My attorneys will handle all future communication. Good luck." That night, I opened a bottle of wine alone on the terrace and finally exhaled. Not because it was over, but because the confrontation had begun on my terms. The war he started in shadows, I was ending in full daylight. Fallout doesn't happen all at once. It begins in whispers, paper trails, cold silences, doors that don't open when you expect them to. And that's exactly how Daniel's world began to collapse. First, his American Express black card was declined at Cipriani. Small detail. A public humiliation. The kind that stings when you're trying to close a tableside deal over Negronis and caviar. I hadn't frozen the account, of course. That would have been messy. I'd simply rerouted the payment structure through a discretionary trust that no longer recognized him as a beneficiary. He didn't even see it coming. Next came the portfolio freeze. The advisory board of his private equity firm, of which I, fun fact, had a quiet voting share thanks to a sweetheart deal years ago, called an emergency session. Conflict of interest, misuse of operating funds, internal audit pending. His face didn't appear on the quarterly update. He was still technically CEO, but the board had moved to limit his access. I watched it all from the sidelines. Calm, focused, empowered, but it wasn't just the money. That's what surprised him the most. It was the people. Daniel had spent years curating his social circle like a hedge fund portfolio. High value, low risk, always transactional. But people in our world don't like volatility. And when word got out that he tried to strip me of assets while cheating with a half-influencer named Chloe, who thought YesG was a skincare brand, suddenly his invitations dried up. The gala circuit closed its doors. Investment committees he'd sat on restructured. Family offices started distancing themselves. Even his sister, who had always looked at me like I was just a well-dressed threat to her inheritance, texted me to apologize for being on the wrong side of things. I didn't respond. But the real turning point came when he tried to retaliate. He filed a countersuit, claimed coercion, said I'd manipulated our finances, hidden assets, compromised our marital estate. His lawyers, third-rate sharks in fifth-rate suits, thought they'd found a hole in the foundation. What they found was a wall of steel. Maureen shredded them in pretrial negotiations. Every claim they made was met with documented evidence, timestamps, expert witnesses on standby. And when we dropped the forensic report on his offshore accounts, oh, yes, Daniel had a few secrets of his own. The silence on the other end of the conference call was almost beautiful. That's when he finally asked to meet. I said yes, not because I wanted to see him, but because I wanted him to see me. We met at the St. Regis Lounge, our usual place for Sunday cocktails when things were still good. I arrived first. Wore black. Not dramatic, not mourning, just decisive. Like the ending of a sentence. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The tan from his Hamptons getaway had faded. His suit was wrinkled, and his confidence, that insufferable, alpha sheen he'd worn like armor, was gone. "Sandra," he said, like a man trying to rewind time. I just looked at him. "You wanted this," I said softly. "You made a plan." He blinked. "I didn't think you'd. I didn't expect. To lose," I offered. He flinched. "I didn't want this to be ugly," he said. "It wasn't ugly," I replied. "It was precise. And that was the truth. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't thrown anything. I hadn't gone to the press, hadn't ruined him with scandal, though I easily could have. I'd simply applied pressure. Legal, strategic, surgical pressure. And now he was sitting across from the woman he tried to dismantle, realizing he had dismantled himself instead. We didn't toast. We didn't hug. We signed the preliminary agreement and parted ways. No drama. Just silence. But not the silence of betrayal. The silence of closure. And as I walked away, heels echoing through the marble corridor, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. Because I hadn't just protected my fortune. I'd protected myself. My legacy. My future. And Daniel. He'd finally learned what it felt like to be written out of the story. A week after I signed the papers, I woke up for the first time without checking my phone. No new legal filings. No cryptic voicemails. No strategic threats wrapped in polite language. Just sunlight spilling across the duvet in my new Tribeca loft, my space, my rules, my name on every deed and document. Peace, it turns out, is not loud. It's quiet, eerily so. I spent the morning barefoot, drinking espresso on the balcony, watching the city hum beneath me like a machine I'd finally learned how to control. The silence, after weeks of war, was disorienting. I'd won. Every advisor told me so. Every bank statement confirmed it. Even the gossip blogs, which I never read but definitely skimmed, had quietly shifted their tone from scandal to admiration. Sandra Hawthorne's silent power play, how the billionaire philanthropist outmaneuvered her CEO husband. But winning isn't the same as moving on. And just when I started thinking maybe the next chapter was going to be softer, slower, I got the call. It was from Maureen. Her voice was clipped, professional, but I knew her well enough to catch the tightness underneath. "I need to forward you something," she said. It came from Daniel's attorney. My heart didn't skip. It sank. Not out of fear. Not even anger. Just exhaustion. "Is he filing again?" "No," she said. "He's not contesting the divorce." "Then what is it?" There was a pause. "He's asking to amend the property disclosure. Apparently, there's something he forgot to include in the filing. Something he claims was an emotional oversight." "Let me guess," I said, bracing myself. "Some offshore stash. Another condo in Dubai." "No," Maureen replied. "It's a trust, but it's not his." I blinked. "Whose is it?" "Yours." Silence. "He set it up 2 years ago," she continued. "Under an alias. It's small, relatively speaking, just under $12 million. But the beneficiary is your name. Just you. No conditions, no revocation clause. The paperwork dates back to your birthday, 2 years ago." I sat down. "That doesn't make sense," I said slowly. "He wouldn't. He was already—" "I know," Maureen cut in. "I triple-checked it. It's real. He never touched the principal. Never disclosed it. Never even claimed it during the proceedings." There it was, the twist I hadn't prepared for. After everything, the secrecy, the betrayal, the arrogance, Daniel had quietly set aside a portion of his wealth just for me. No strings, no signatures, just a file buried inside a law office under an assumed name, timed months before he ever contacted that divorce firm. It made no sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. Because the truth, the ugly, inconvenient truth, was that love isn't always clean. Sometimes it curdles slowly. It mutates into something warped, half resentment, half protection. And now I was staring at the last relic of a man who had betrayed me, but maybe never fully stopped loving me in some deeply twisted way. The trust had a note attached, a scanned letter, handwritten, in case I ever become the man I'm afraid I'm turning into. So you know it wasn't always a lie. I stared at it for a long time, longer than I care to admit. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to feel disgusted. But what I felt was confused, exhausted, human. It would be easy to torch it. Let it go. Close the account and walk away. That's what a storybook ending would demand. But I'm not a storybook woman. So I kept it. Not because I needed the money, not even close. But because every empire has artifacts. And this was mine. A $12 million time capsule of what love once almost was. Not a reconciliation. Not forgiveness. Just context. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stared out at the skyline. The war was over. I had won. But the truth? Victory doesn't always come in clean lines. Sometimes it arrives with footnotes. It's strange, what remains after a storm. Not the debris, not really. What stays is the silence. The stillness after everything's been broken and rearranged. That's where I live now. The papers are signed. The money is secure. My name is clean. My reputation, somehow even stronger. People look at me differently now. Whispers at fundraisers, subtle nods at board meetings. They say things like, "She handled it with such grace," or "Classic Sandra, strategic to the last second." They call it strength. I call it survival. But when I'm alone, when the staff leaves, when the calls stop, when the wine glass is half full and the city lights flicker like they're winking at me, I think about what didn't make it through. Not the marriage, not the betrayal, the trust, not the legal kind, the real kind, the quiet, bone-deep kind that lets you fall asleep next to someone without guarding your pulse. That part of me didn't survive, and I'm not sure it was supposed to. They say power costs something. I've paid the bill. In full. But don't mistake that for regret. What I did deliberately. Calmly. Elegantly. I protected what I built. What I earned. I rewrote the ending he thought he'd written for me. And in doing so, I became someone even I hadn't expected. A woman with nothing left to prove, and no one left to deceive her. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart. It reframes it. It forces you to see who you are without the person you once built your world around. And once you know that version of yourself, you can't unknow her. I like her. She's quiet. She's unshakable. And she doesn't check the door twice anymore. Daniel, for what it's worth, disappeared from the headlines. Last I heard, he moved out west. Something about consulting for a boutique firm. I don't follow. I don't care. Not out of spite, but because the part of me that once needed answers doesn't ask questions anymore. And the trust, the one he left behind like some awkward late apology, it's untouched. Not out of pettiness, out of principle. Because if that money was meant to say, "I'm sorry," then silence is my way of saying, "I'm not." So here I am, not broken, not bitter, just clear. And clarity, I've learned, is more valuable than any settlement. It's the currency of freedom, and I intend to spend it well.